Welcome to Silent Queen's Rise. Let's get into the story. He told her he was closing a deal in Seattle. He said it the way he always said things that were not true. Calmly, with the particular ease of a man who had practiced a lie long enough that it no longer registered as one. He said it while sitting at a table for two in a restaurant that bore her family's name on the deed, in a city her grandfather had quietly shaped for 40 years, with a woman who was not his wife, leaning across the candlelight to touch his hand. His wife was 4 tables away. She had not planned to be there. She had come to meet her foundation's executive director for a working dinner, the kind of dinner that ends with a printed agenda and a handshake and a revised budget sitting in your inbox before you've gotten home. She had arrived early. She had been shown to her preferred table, the corner booth near the window, the one the staff always held for her because they knew who she was, even if most of the city did not. She saw him before he saw her. Of course she did. She had always been the one who paid attention. His name was Declan Farrow, and for 11 years, Imogen Farrow had believed that what she had given him was a life. She was about to discover what he had done with it. Part 1. The name behind the name. Imogen Hartley was born in a house that was more archive than home. Her grandmother, Estelle Hartley, had built the first Hartley Holdings property in 1961, with a loan she negotiated herself, at a time when banks did not lend to women, and certainly not to a woman who showed up without a husband. By the time Imogen was born, Hartley Holdings owned 47 commercial properties across 6 states, a hotel portfolio that had quietly absorbed 3 smaller chains, and enough municipal bonds to make the kind of money that compounds while you sleep. Imogen grew up understanding that wealth was not a destination. It was a condition, like weather. You did not celebrate it or display it. You managed it, the way her grandmother managed everything. Methodically, without sentimentality, with an eye on the long horizon. She also grew up understanding what wealth did to people who learned about it. Her uncle Theodore had 3 marriages, each lasting approximately as long as it took the wife to realize that being adjacent to Hartley money was more interesting than being married to Theodore. Her cousin brought a boyfriend home for Easter, and by the following Christmas the boyfriend had presented a business plan to the family attorney. Her own mother, born into a different kind of old money, had watched Imogen's father spend the Hartley connection, like a credit card he had not earned, and the marriage had ended in a settlement negotiation that took longer than the marriage itself. By the time Imogen was 25, she had made a decision that most people in her position would have found unnecessary, and most people outside her position would have found impossible to sustain. She would live as herself. Not the Hartley herself, just Imogen. She left Boston. She took a position at an urban planning nonprofit in Chicago. Decent work, real work, the kind that required her to understand how neighborhoods aged and what buildings meant to the people who depended on them. She drove a 10-year-old Volvo. She rented an apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with a broken elevator and a landlord named Gerald, who fixed things on the 2nd attempt and sometimes the 3rd. She told no one about the trust. She had a number she could access, a figure that sat in documents she reviewed quarterly with her family's attorney, a woman named Sybil, who wore the same pearl earrings to every meeting, and had been managing Hartley affairs since before Imogen was born. The number had 11 digits before the decimal point, and Imogen had not spent a meaningful portion of it in her adult life. She did not intend to until she had a reason she chose for herself. She met Declan Farrow at a city planning forum when she was 27. He was a commercial real estate developer, mid-level, ambitious, in the specific way of a man who had grown up watching wealthier men and decided he would become one. He was articulate and quick, the kind of person who asked good questions in public settings, because he understood that asking good questions was a performance that paid dividends. But he also, and this was the part that got her, remembered what people said. He remembered what Imogen said. A week after the forum, they ran into each other at a coffee shop, and he asked her about something she had mentioned in passing, a community land trust initiative she had been working on. He had looked it up. He had an opinion about it. He wanted to know hers. She was not naive. She was assessing, but he passed enough of the early tests that she let herself continue. They dated for 14 months. Imogen watched how he treated the people who could do nothing for him. She watched how he handled being wrong in a conversation. She watched how he spoke about his ex-girlfriend, and when he spoke about her without contempt or credit, she filed that observation as neutral. She watched how he behaved on the nights. Things didn't go his way, the failed pitches, the lost bids, the deals that didn't close. He didn't take it out on her. He went quiet, which was its own kind of information, but not the dangerous kind. She told herself she was being careful. What she was actually being was hopeful, which is the most dangerous thing a careful woman can be. They married when she was 29. Imogen organized everything. Declan chose the honeymoon destination and showed up in a suit she had reminded him to pick up twice. She filed that observation and chose not to examine it. Part 2. The Architecture of Invisible Work. The first years of their marriage had a shape Imogen recognized intellectually even as she lived inside it. She managed the household the way she managed everything, completely, invisibly, without expecting acknowledgement. Because she had learned early that expecting acknowledgement was the first step toward resentment, and she did not want to be a resentful person. She paid the mortgage from her nonprofit salary, which was modest but which she supplemented when necessary. From a personal account she kept separate, funded by a small, careful fraction of the trust's quarterly distributions. Declan did not ask questions about their finances because Declan believed she earned what she earned, and that was sufficient. He was not a man who examined the machinery of his own comfort. She handled the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, the HVAC maintenance contracts, the relationship with the plumber they had used 3 times and trusted, the appointment scheduling for their 2 dogs, a pair of elderly beagles named Tuesday, and Ford, who had been hers before the marriage, and who Declan fed inconsistently and loved loudly when it suited him. She handled their social calendar, which was also his professional calendar. Because in the world of commercial development, dinner invitations and site visits and charity galas were all the same meeting in different clothing. She planned his mother's birthday parties. She sent flowers to his business partners when their parents died. She remembered that his college friend Barrett was going through a divorce, and sent a bottle of bourbon and a note, signed with both their names, to an address Declan would not have been able to recall. She kept records, not because she planned to use them, because she was her grandmother's granddaughter, and Estelle Hartley had kept a ledger for every transaction of her adult life, financial and otherwise, and had told Imogen once that the discipline of documentation was not about distrust. It was about clarity. You can only be honest about a situation if you can see it accurately, she had said, and you can only see it accurately if you have written it down. Imogen kept a spreadsheet. Every household expense she paid, every appointment she scheduled, every bill she handled without being asked. The document grew quietly. In a folder on her laptop, she had named administrative, in a tone that was neither bitter nor dramatic, just accurate. The trust remained untouched. Sybil sent the quarterly summaries. Imogen reviewed them in the early mornings before Declan woke up, sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee, reading figures that represented a version of her life she had temporarily set aside. The figures grew. She let them grow. She was not ready for that life yet. She was still running the test. Part 3. His mother. Beverly Farrow was the kind of woman who communicated displeasure through compliments. She had a gift for the sentence that appeared, on its surface, to say something generous and revealed, on closer inspection, a wound deliberately placed. "Your house always smells so clean," she said once, looking around the living room that Imogen had prepared for her visit with the specific exhaustion of someone who knows their effort will be noted and not acknowledged. "It's funny. I never pictured Declan with someone so domestic." The word domestic, delivered with Beverly's smile, meant something precise. It meant, "I expected better for my son." It meant, "I see what you are, and what you are is a housekeeper in a collar I approve of." Imogen understood the subtext perfectly. She responded to it with the same strategy she applied to everything she found difficult. She documented it mentally. She did not escalate, and she continued doing the work because the alternative was allowing Beverly's opinion of her to determine the condition of her own home. Declan's younger brother, a man named Perry, who had never held a job longer than 18 months, and who had borrowed money from Declan 4 times that Imogen knew of, and probably more that she didn't, called her Ginny with a smirk that was not affectionate. He did this despite being corrected twice. The 3rd time, Imogen looked at him and said her name once, clearly, without a smile, and he stopped. But the dynamic it revealed did not stop. Perry treated her the way people treat furniture they did not choose, functionally, without interest in its origin. She raised it with Declan once. She told him she felt excluded from his family's decisions, that information moved around her rather than through her, that she had learned about a Thanksgiving gathering from Beverly's Facebook post rather than a phone call. Declan looked at her with an expression she had learned to recognize. It was the look of a man who had decided before she finished speaking that the problem was her perception rather than the situation. "You're being too sensitive," he said. "They're not excluding you. That's just how they communicate." Imogen did not raise it again. She added the conversation to the ledger she kept in her mind, the one that was not a spreadsheet but that was equally precise. And she continued. The cabinet grew heavier. The woman carrying it grew quieter. And the quietness was not acceptance. It was arithmetic, the kind of math that takes a long time to complete and arrives, eventually, at a number. Part 4. The dinner. The restaurant was called Linden. It occupied the ground floor of a building in the River North neighborhood that the Hartley portfolio had owned for 31 years. Imogen had suggested the renovation that transformed it from a struggling seafood place into one of the better dining rooms in Chicago. She had done this quietly, through the property management company, through channels that had her grandmother's name but not hers. The executive chef did not know who owned the building. The maitre d' knew only that a table in the corner booth was to be made available on request for a Miss Hartley, which was the name on the account. Imogen used her maiden name for the reservation. She always did. It was practical. The Hartley name opened certain doors, and she had learned not to arrive at certain meetings without it. She had been in Denver for 6 days, a conference on affordable housing development, kind of conference where the panels ran long, and the hotel, coffee was terrible, and you spent 3 days genuinely engaging with the work, and 3 days wondering if you could cut the trip short without being rude to the organizers. She had called Declan every evening. He had answered most of the time. He sounded fine. He mentioned the dogs. He said his mother had stopped by, which Imogen noted with the detached recognition of a woman who has learned not to feel things she cannot do anything about from a hotel room in another time zone. Her return flight landed 40 minutes early. She took a car to the restaurant because the working dinner was scheduled, and it made more sense than going home first. She texted Declan from the car to let him know she was back in the city. He did not respond. She assumed he was in a meeting. She was shown to the corner booth. She ordered water and reviewed her notes. The executive director, a woman named Priscilla, who had the particular energy of someone who had once been underfunded for too long and had not fully recovered from the relief of not being underfunded anymore, was running 8 minutes late. Imogen did not mind. She was accustomed to using waiting time. She looked up when the host walked a couple to a table near the window. The woman was in her early 30s, dark-haired, wearing a dress that had been chosen for a specific kind of evening. She was laughing before she sat down, the laugh of someone performing enjoyment rather than experiencing it. Her handbag went on the chair beside her. The man she was with had his hand at the small of her back. The man she was with was Declan. He was wearing the navy blazer Imogen had given him for his birthday. His hair was recently cut. He looked relaxed in the specific way of a person who believes they are not being observed. Imogen did not move. She did not make a sound. She watched him help the woman into her chair and take the seat across from her. And she watched him pick up the menu with the ease of someone who had done this many times before in this specific configuration. And she felt something pass through her that was not quite any emotion she had a word for. It was the sensation of a calculation completing, a very long calculation arriving, without drama, at its final answer. She looked at them for 30 seconds, long enough to be certain, long enough to observe, with the clarity of a woman who had spent her adult life being precise about what she was actually seeing. Then she picked up her phone and sent Priscilla a brief message. "Something has come up. Let's reschedule. Apologies for the inconvenience." She would explain later. Or she would not. Either way, the dinner was over. She did not leave. She ordered a glass of wine and sat in the corner booth and watched her husband take the woman's hand across the table. And she did not cry, and she did not shake, because the thing she felt was not the kind of feeling that produces tears. It was older than that. It was the thing that happens when a woman has been told for years that she is imagining things and discovers, concretely and undeniably, that she was not imagining anything. She took no photographs. She sent no messages to Declan. She finished her wine. She left a tip that was larger than the bill because she always did, in places where the staff was good, and the staff at Linden was always good. She walked out into the November evening and stood on the sidewalk and let the cold settle around her for a moment. Then she called Sybil. "Imogen," Sybil said, picking up on the second ring with the tone of someone who had been available for 40 years and intended to remain so. "I need to activate the discretionary authorization," Imogen said. "Full access. I also need you to schedule a meeting with the portfolio team for Monday morning, and I need the current status of the River North property leases. Of course, Sybil said. She did not ask why. She never did. It was one of the things Imogen had always appreciated about her. And Sybil. Imogen paused, looking through the restaurant window at the couple near the window. Pull the ownership documentation for Lyndon. I want a current copy on file. She walked to her car. She drove home. She fed the dogs who were hungry in the specific pointed way of dogs who have not been fed on schedule. She sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water. She opened her laptop. She began to work. Part 5, the folder. Declan came home the following afternoon. He was carrying the particular relaxed energy of a man who had recently been pleased with himself. He set his keys on the counter, opened the refrigerator, looked into it without intention, closed it. He turned around. Imogen was sitting at the kitchen table. There was a folder on the table in front of her. Hey, he said. How was Denver? Informative, she said. How was the week? Quiet. Caught up on some things. His voice was practiced. Not the voice of a man concealing something. That would have been too obvious. The voice of a man who had decided in advance that nothing was wrong and was performing that decision. I had dinner at Lyndon last night, Imogen said. A pause. Barely perceptible. Just long enough. Oh yeah? How was the food? Very good. She opened the folder. The first page was a printed photograph, taken not by her but by the restaurant's own security system, retrieved through the property management company. It showed Declan and a woman she had since identified as Nadine. Nadine Holt, a junior associate at a firm that had done consulting work for Declan's development company 18 months ago. At the table near the window, his hand on hers. Both of them leaning forward. She placed the photograph on the table and turned it to face him. Declan looked at it. His expression did what expressions do when a man realizes the architecture of his deception has a structural flaw he did not account for. I was sitting in the corner booth, she said. Her voice was level. She had practiced this, not the words exactly but the register. The place in her chest where she intended to speak from. I watched you for 30 seconds before I left. I wanted to be certain of what I was seeing. She placed a second page on the table, and then I went home and spent the evening reviewing some additional information. The second page was a summary. She had not dramatized it. She did not need to. A financial transfer of $1,700 to a hotel in Milwaukee on a weekend Declan had attended, supposedly, a developers conference, a dinner reservation, made from his phone, through an account linked to his email, which she had never accessed before last night, and which had not been difficult to access once she decided to. At a restaurant in the West Loop, a Tuesday in September. Table for two. A jewelry purchase from a gallery on Michigan Avenue. The date was 6 weeks before their anniversary. Their anniversary, on which she had received a card he had signed without a personal note, and a dinner out that she had suggested. She laid the pages out one at a time. Declan watched the way a man watches something he cannot stop. This has been going on for at least 14 months, she said. Probably longer. You are not a careful man, Declan. She looked at him steadily. You have simply been married to a woman who is careful enough that you never had to be. Declan set his keys down. He had been holding them without realizing it. Imogen, listen. I know it looks like what it is. She closed the folder. She placed her hands flat on the table. A gesture she had inherited without knowing it from a grandmother. She had watched conduct difficult conversations with the same particular stillness. I'm not asking you to explain. I'm telling you what's going to happen next. The divorce paperwork will be filed on Monday. My attorney will be in contact with whomever you retain. You can stay in the guest room until the process begins. We have a life together. You can't just... We have a marriage that you have been conducting in bad faith for over a year. She stood. That is not a life. That's a stage set. She picked up the folder. She walked toward the hallway. Imogen, please, I'll end it. It's already over. I was going to. She stopped in the doorway. She did not turn around. You should know something before you start calculating your next move, she said. There was a pause, just long enough. I'm not who you think I am. She walked upstairs. She closed the bedroom door. She sat on the edge of the bed, and she breathed for 20 seconds with her eyes closed. And then she opened her laptop and sent 2 emails. One to Sybil, one to her cousin, who was an attorney and who had been waiting, with the patient certainty of someone who has watched a situation develop from a distance, for this particular phone call. Part 6. The Foundation. The Hartley Foundation had existed on paper for 11 years. Imogen had kept it dormant during her marriage, not out of secrecy exactly, but out of the same instinct, that had kept everything about her financial life contained in quiet. She had not been ready to step into that visibility, or perhaps she had simply been too occupied managing everything else. She was ready now. The first public act of the foundation was a grant to 3 housing nonprofits in Chicago. Organizations Imogen had worked alongside in her years at the planning nonprofit. Organizations she knew were doing careful and important work in neighborhoods that commercial development tended to regard as opportunity zones rather than communities. The grant was significant. It was the kind of number that appeared in press releases. The press release used the name Hartley Foundation. The photograph showed Imogen shaking hands with the executive directors of all 3 organizations at an event space she had rented specifically for the occasion. It was not the first time her photograph had appeared publicly, but it was the first time it had appeared in a context that made clear what her name was attached to. Declan saw the coverage 2 days after it ran. He was sitting in the kitchen of the house he could not manage, surrounded by the particular disorder of a man who had never once learned the name of the pest control service. When he came across the article on his phone, he read it twice. He stared at the photograph for a longer time than he would have admitted. "Hartley," said his brother Perry, who had come over that evening under the pretense of checking in and was mostly eating food from the refrigerator. "Like Hartley Holdings? Like the building people?" "Like the building people," Declan said. Perry looked at him with an expression that was part disbelief and part the particular satisfaction of someone who has spent years watching a situation and is now watching the consequence arrive. "That's your wife," he said. "That's my wife," Declan said. The second act was the one that could not be undone. Through the Hartley portfolio, Imogen authorized the sale of a commercial property on the near north side. A mixed-use building with ground-floor retail and 8 floors of office space that Declan's development group had been attempting to acquire for 2 years. They had been negotiating with a holding company they knew as Greenfield Asset Partners. They had submitted 3 offers. All 3 had been under consideration for what the Greenfield representatives described as an extended evaluation period, which was accurate in the sense that Imogen had been evaluating whether to sell, and the evaluation had been extended by circumstances that were personal and which she had chosen, until now, to keep separate from business. She did not sell to Declan's group. She did not block the sale either, at least not directly. She accepted an offer from a different buyer, a women-led development company she had been introduced to through the foundation, who intended to convert the upper floors into permanent affordable housing, with ground floor retail anchored by local businesses. The deal closed in 6 weeks. Declan's group had been waiting on that property for 2 years. Without it, the larger acquisition they had been building around it fell apart. His lead investor pulled out. His co-developer called him twice in 1 week and then stopped calling, which was worse. He sat in a lawyer's office on a Thursday afternoon and tried to understand how the parcel he had been attempting to purchase had been held by a trust that was managed by the same attorney who was now handling his wife's side of the divorce. He called Imogen that evening. She let it ring 4 times. "Did you know?" he asked when she answered. "The Greenfield property. Did you know it was in your trust?" She looked out the window of the apartment she had moved into 3 weeks after the divorce filing. It was on the 14th floor of a building her grandmother had purchased in 1988, and which had been in the Hartley portfolio ever since. She had not chosen it for that reason. She had chosen it because it had good light and a second bedroom for the nights the dogs stayed over. "Of course I knew," she said. "I know everything in my portfolio." A silence. "You never told me. You never asked." She kept her voice even, the same way she had kept it even in the kitchen, the same way she had kept it even for 11 years of managed dinners and managed conversations and managed family gatherings at which she had felt herself managed out of the room. "You spent 11 years married to a woman with a significant stake in the city's real estate market, and you never once thought to ask about her work, her family, her finances, her past. You knew I was from Boston. You knew my grandmother's name because I mentioned it at a party once, and someone at the table recognized it, and you changed the subject. That's not fair. It's exactly fair." She moved to the window. The city was laid out below in the particular way of a city seen at night by a woman who knows exactly which lights belong to her family and which ones she has made her own. "You were incurious, Declan. That is the simplest way to say it. You were incurious about me for 11 years, and curiosity is the minimum requirement for knowing a person. Without it, you were not married to me. You were adjacent to me, and you treated the adjacency like it was enough. His voice, when it came back, was quieter. My mother wants to reach out. Your mother can reach out. I don't promise to respond, but she's welcome to try. Perry asked if you might be willing to. Tell Perry the foundation has a standard grant application process. It's on the website. He's welcome to apply. She paused. I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'm going to go, because the dogs need to be fed, and I have an early morning. Okay, he said. His voice was the voice of a man sitting in the rubble of a calculation he had never bothered to run. I hid who I was because I wanted to be loved for who I was. She said it without anger and without performance. The way you say a thing that is simply and completely true. I ran that experiment for 11 years. The result was not what I hoped, but the experiment was not a waste, because it told me something I needed to know. That a person who never asks a question is not someone who loves you. They are someone who has decided you are already explained. She ended the call. She put the phone on the counter. She fed Tuesday and Ford, who ate with the single-minded gratitude of elderly dogs who have survived a change in routine and emerged intact. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table, which was her own kitchen table, in her own apartment, in a building that had been in her family for 37 years. And she let the quiet settle around her. Part 7. The household he could not run. Without Imogen, the house fell apart with the specific speed of a system that has been maintained entirely by one person who is no longer present. The internet went down first. The account was in her name, and she had transferred it, cleanly and without fuss, to her new address. Declan spent 45 minutes on the phone with the provider, before learning that no, the account could not simply be transferred to him, and yes, he would need to open a new one, and no, the technician could not come until Thursday. The property tax notice came next. Imogen had always handled the quarterly payments through an automatic system she had set up years ago through an account that was now closed. Declan found the notice in the mail and put it on the counter and found it there again 3 weeks later, when the follow-up notice arrived. Beverly came to help. She lasted 11 days. In those 11 days, she discovered what Imogen had been doing for over a decade. Not from a ledger or a document, but from the actual experience of trying to replicate it, and finding that every system she reached for was more complex and more intentional than she had assumed. The insurance renewals, the property maintenance schedule, the vet records for the dogs, which Imogen had taken with her, along with the dogs. She called Perry. She was holding everything together, Beverly said. I didn't know. I thought she was particular. Perry was quiet for a moment. She was the only competent person in this situation, Mom, he said. And we spent 11 years treating her like she was a problem we were tolerating. Beverly did not respond. It was the most honest thing that had been said about Imogen in their household in 11 years. It came 11 years too late, and it was said to the wrong person, and it changed nothing, but it was said. Nadine lasted 5 months. She had met Declan during a version of his life that Imogen had built. The organized life, the managed social calendar, the dinners with the right people at the right restaurants, the house that ran without visible effort. When that version collapsed, what remained was a man who could not locate the water shut-off valve, and who had not once vacuumed the stairs in the 14 months they had been involved, and who had, on 3 separate occasions, forgotten to make a reservation at a restaurant she had suggested specifically because she wanted to go there. She looked at the disorder of his kitchen on a Tuesday in February and understood that she had made a very common mistake. She had not fallen for a man. She had fallen for the residue of a woman's work, and the woman had left. She was polite about it. Imogen later heard this from a mutual acquaintance and thought, of course she was. There was nothing to be angry at. The situation was simply what it was. Part 8. What she built. Imogen moved into the 14th floor apartment on a Saturday. She moved with the efficiency of a woman who has done many things efficiently for a long time and has now decided to apply that efficiency to herself. She bought a bed. An actual good bed, the kind she had wanted for years and had talked herself out of because it seemed excessive. She bought a set of coffee cups in a color that had no practical justification beyond the fact that she liked it. She bought a lamp for the corner of the living room, where the light was not quite right, and she had always meant to address it, and never had, because there was always something else. The apartment had a second bedroom that she set up as an office. The wall that faced the window she left clear, because the light came through in the late afternoon, in a way that she did not want to interrupt. She stepped into the Hartley Foundation role formally that spring. She brought in an operations director, a woman named Constance, who had spent 20 years running nonprofits, and who took one look at the foundation's existing structure and said, with the enthusiasm of someone who has been waiting to apply their skills at this scale, I see some things I'd like to talk about. And together, they redesigned the grant-making process and expanded the foundation's focus to include workforce development and elder housing, two areas Imogen had been reading about for years. The work suited her in the specific way that work suits a person when they stop doing it for someone else and start doing it as themselves. A journalist from a regional business publication asked for an interview. Imogen agreed. The resulting piece ran under the headline, Hartley Foundation's Quiet Return, which she found slightly irritating because she had not in fact been quiet. She had been present in a room where no one had thought to look for her. The article described her background, her years in urban planning, her grandmother's legacy, her current work. It mentioned the divorce in one sentence. It spent 4 paragraphs on the housing grants and 2 on her vision for the foundation's next 5 years. Her grandmother's attorney, who was in her late 80s and had slowed down but not stopped, called after the article ran to say that she thought Estelle would have appreciated the photograph. It showed Imogen on the terrace of the apartment, the city behind her, wearing a simple cream blazer. Her posture easy, her expression, the expression of a woman who has recently located something she thought she had set aside and discovered that it is in fact still intact. Part 9. The Call. It came on a Wednesday evening in March. Imogen was on the terrace with a cup of tea and a document she was reviewing for the foundation's upcoming board meeting. Tuesday was asleep on the outdoor rug. Ford was watching the city with the detached interest of a dog who has seen enough weather to find most things unsurprising. Her phone lit up. She looked at it for a moment before answering. Declan's voice was different. She noticed it immediately. The ease was gone. The performance was gone. What remained was something smaller, which was in its way closer to the person she had hoped to marry. I need to ask you something, he said. Not through lawyers. Just, I need to understand something. All right. Did you know? From the beginning? Did you know who you were and decide not to tell me because you were testing me or whatever? Did you plan all of this? Imogen looked out at the city. She considered the question as the serious question it was. I didn't plan you specifically. I planned a version of my life that would tell me something true, and it did. She paused. I knew who I was the entire time. I chose not to lead with it because I had watched my whole life what that information did to people, what it attracted. I wanted to find out what remained when it wasn't there, and I found out. He was quiet. That's not fair to me, he said. I didn't know what I was being judged on. You weren't being judged. She kept her voice even. You were being known, or you were being given the opportunity to know me. There's no test if you're simply paying attention to the person in front of you. The questions I was waiting for you to ask were not trick questions. Where did you grow up? What was your family like? What did your grandmother do? Who do you want to be? She said it without bitterness, which surprised her a little, and then didn't. She had done the arithmetic a long time ago, and the answer was settled. You asked me none of those things, Declan. Not because I was hiding, because you were not curious. Another silence. The kind that contains something that might, under different circumstances, have been a different conversation. My mother is sorry, he said finally. Your mother can be sorry. That's available to her. Imogen set down her tea. But an apology that arrives after the balance sheet has been made public is not the same thing as an apology that arrives because someone examined their behavior and found it wanting. She paused. Tell her I hold no particular anger toward her. I simply have no space in my life for relationships that require me to be less than I am in order to function. He didn't say anything for a long moment. I lost the Greenfield deal, he said. I know. You were on the other side of that negotiation for 2 years. Yes, and you never said anything. No. She looked at the city, the specific lights she knew, and the many more she didn't. The ongoing complicated organism of a place that her family had helped shape for 60 years. I was your wife, not your business partner. You never asked about my work or my family or my history, and I was not going to walk you through my portfolio uninvited. I made decisions about my property based on what I believed was the right use of it. I always have. He exhaled. I keep thinking, he said, about all the dinners, the parties, the things you organized. I never once. I didn't know you were. She let the sentence stay unfinished. You didn't know, she said, because you weren't looking. The information was available. I exist. I have existed for 41 years in a city your industry operates in. My grandmother's name is on buildings you have walked past. She paused one more time. giving the next sentence the space it required. I wanted to be loved for who I was. I discovered I was not known at all. Those are not the same failure, but they are both failures, and only one of them is mine. She ended the call. She sat on the terrace for a long time after. Ford eventually moved from his spot by the railing to sit beside her chair, which he did only when he decided she needed the company, which she always appreciated because he was not wrong. Part 10. What remained? On a Thursday evening in April, almost 5 months after the restaurant, Imogen sat on the terrace in the early dark, with a blanket her cousin had brought her when she moved in. It was good wool, soft and substantial, the kind of thing that does what it is designed to do without requiring you to think about it. She had made a decision that afternoon that she had been circling for some time. She opened her phone. She navigated to the folder she had labeled Records, a folder containing the security photograph, the financial summaries, the hotel confirmation, the jewelry receipt, the small and careful architecture of everything she had assembled in the weeks after the restaurant. The evidence that had served its purpose. The divorce was final. The terms were settled. The dogs were with her. The foundation was running. The River North property had transferred to the new owners, and the conversion project had broken ground. She looked at the folder for a moment. She deleted it. The phone asked her to confirm. She confirmed. The screen returned her photographs, the most recent ones at the top. Tuesday on the new bed, having apparently decided that the rule about dogs on the bed was a guideline. Ford on the terrace, watchful as always. A photo from the foundation gala 2 weeks ago. Imogen and her cousin, laughing at something that had happened near the dessert table. Both of them slightly blurred from movement. The view from the terrace on a morning when the light had been exceptional, and she had taken the photograph for no reason beyond wanting to remember it. She set the phone down. She thought about the night at the restaurant, not about Declan and the woman at the window table, about the corner booth, about the moment she had sat in that booth with the full knowledge of what she had just seen, and had felt the thing happen that she had spent 11 years thinking she was managing toward. The clarity of a situation fully understood, the arithmetic complete, the number arrived at. She had not broken. She had not gone to his table and caused a scene that the staff would have remembered and described later. She had not called him in the car on the way home, voice shaking, demanding an account of what she had just witnessed. She had not needed to. She had called Sybil. That was the thing she kept returning to. Not the betrayal, the choice, the moment when she understood that the version of herself she had been careful about, the one who lived below her means, who drove the unassuming car, who clipped coupons not because she had to, but because the discipline kept her grounded. That version had done what it was designed to do. It had protected her against one kind of harm, but it had not protected her against being unseen. And there were 2 reasons a woman becomes invisible: because she chooses to be, and because no one around her chooses to look. She had been both kinds of invisible, and she was finished being the second. The foundation's budget for the coming year was the largest it had ever been. The housing projects were ahead of schedule. Her name was in a press release that had been picked up by 3 national publications. Her grandmother's attorney had sent a handwritten note that said, simply, "Estelle would recognize you." She had put it on the refrigerator, held in place by a magnet that Tuesday had knocked off the fridge twice, and that Imogen kept replacing. She had not stopped being careful. She had simply stopped being small. The city moved below her, the way cities move at night, all that motion and intention and commerce and life. And she sat above it in the quiet of a terrace she owned, and a building her grandmother had purchased before she was born, and a life she was now living at the size it was actually meant to be. Some women are made small by the people around them. Some women make themselves small on purpose, to see who stays. Imogen had done the second thing, and the answer had been instructive, and she had taken that instruction and used it to build something she did not have to hide. She pulled the blanket closer. Ford put his head on her knee. The city offered its lights. She was home.